Welcome to our podcast. My name is Lindsey Miller, and I am the brand new host of the OVF podcast. And I'm lucky enough to be joined today by Kyle Golding, who everyone knows because he's been doing this for us for years. So, hi, Kyle.
Hi, Lindsey. It's so nice to be on this side of the conversation.
Yeah. Okay, so how long have you been the host of the OVF podcast?
We started the podcast for OVF in 2018, and there was a time in the period where I was the chairman, and I was too busy on meeting days to do the podcast, so Dennis Spillman filled in for me a little bit. My business partner, Pritch Pitcher, did a couple of those. So of the 78 episodes, I think I did around 60 between 2018 and this episode here.
Oh, wow. Those are some big shoes to fill.
No worries, you got it.
And what are you doing now that you're not podcasting for OVF?
So I major career change is what was the catalyst for all this. So I've been doing the Golding Group consulting for the last 13 to 14 years. Like you mentioned, Pritch Pitcher, I had a couple other business partners. I recently took over as the Director of Corporate Relations for the Meinders School of Business at Oakland City University. So my consulting business is now my side hustle, and I have a full-time job with OCU. I'm an alum, and I've been working with them for quite a while on a variety of things, and they asked several times if I would take this role, and we eventually made it a offer too good to be true. So that's my day-to-day there. I'm also starting a podcast for the Meinders School of Business. So we recorded the first episode with the dean, and we haven't published it yet, but that'll be coming soon. So my business podcast, the Strategic Growth Podcast, is coming to an end. We just published our final episode 200 of that last week. So that's coming to an end, and my Saturday Morning Hustle podcast is going to be coming to an end in a couple of months when we hit episode 400 of that podcast. And so now transitioning the OVF podcast to a new host as well. So I'm still going to be involved in OVF. I'm still on the board and still be attending meetings, just in a new role professionally.
Yeah, that is a lot of change.
Right.
And a lot of podcasting and
yes.
all these different channels.
Yeah, in fact, I added it up recently. I've either hosted or been a guest on over 650 podcast episodes.
That is insane. Wow. Have you always had this inclination towards interviewing and this journalist leaning?
For me, actually, it was less about being a journalist or having those types of conversations, but my background, my original career path was the music industry. I was in production, so I was always been comfortable around microphones and recording equipment and eventually video equipment and all those things. Now we're talking back in the 80s and 90s when it wasn't as small and compact and digital like we have here, but I've been involved in production for a very long time. And along that same time period when I was doing that, I did end up with a lot of hosting events and being an MC, and just again, someone who's comfortable on a microphone. Obviously I can talk, just naturally, just talk. So when podcasting became a thing, it made a lot of sense for me, for someone who's comfortable around microphones and a fluent speaker of ideas, to start podcasting, and it definitely has become a aspect of my professional self-brand.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this transferable skills, talking to everyone. What is your background? And it's I'm in the music industry, but then I got into marketing and entrepreneurship. Makes total sense, right?
And now I'm in economic development and higher education.
I mean, just a straight linear path for me.
like it always is. It's easy like you see on TV.
Exactly. And I love that the thing that you built is now the side hustle, that you don't have to totally let go of that while you're transitioning into these
Which I think
roles.
is an aspect of business in 2024 or 2025 eventually, is those rigid structures aren't as rigid these days. Even in higher education, there's opportunity to be flexible and adaptable. And if you have an idea, or if you bring value, or you're collaborative, then you can find ways to make a lot of things work. And that's exciting for young people starting new businesses, or seasoned veterans like myself who have been around the block a few times, to have opportunities to do new and interesting things because technology is advanced, because our ideas of business has advanced, the way we fund things, the way we collaborate, it's all new and exciting, and I think continue to change and be more accessible and exciting, giving more people a voice to join the conversation and do something interesting and beneficial to them and then maybe their community as a whole.
Yeah. Do you get to do that within the new role, like working with students and things like that at OCU?
There's a lot of, speaking of change, there's a lot of change that I'm expected to bring to the Meinders School of Business at OCU. It's higher education, right, which doesn't usually have the reputation of being super cutting edge. It's a very traditional institution, but the Meinders School of Business is really cutting edge. They're very forward-looking. It's a small private university, so they can make changes quicker than maybe a giant state school can. And they're looking to be innovative, to change things. They know, especially in business, things, the old adage, it used to be 24 months and everything changes, and in 18 months everything changes, and now it feels like every 90 days everything changes, typically because of technology or some other catalyst. And OCU is looking to, in the business school, be more competitive in those spaces. Our highest enrollment right now is in supply chain management and data analytics, which is AI. Mm-hmm. And so these are the careers of the future. This is where the job opportunities are happening today and for the next 4 or 5 years. So the university has reacted to that. And a lot of the conversations they've had with me in this process of trying to get me to come work there and for me to convince them I was the right guy for what they're looking for was their ability to listen to the business community, to not just teach what we teach and hope it works out, but really paying attention to what are business leaders telling us today. Not just business leaders, the most innovative business leaders, the people who are on the rise, that are making things happen. What do they need the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years from students, from young people, or even their own employees who maybe have their bachelor's degree, but it's time for a master's degree or a certification or something to advance their career. What do they need to learn? How do they need to learn it? Does it need to be on campus? Does it need to be offline, online? Does it need to be nights and weekends? Does it need to be asynchronous? All of those things that make a much more prepared workforce of the future is what we have to react to today. And I'm getting a lot of opportunities to have that conversation at OCU.
I love that, because you do think of like these education institutions as sort of dinosaur-ish, right? They're bringing you in.
They're traditional in approach, and we don't want them changing on the fly. We don't want them reacting to every trend that comes along, but we also don't want them to be behind the curve. Mm-hmm. So balancing those things, what's forward-thinking without being ultra-reactionary is responsibility of a good organization, and it's one of my favorite aspects of the role I'll be playing there.
I love it. Well, good for OCU, and I can't wait to see all of the cool things that you do over at Meinders School. And our office is at Access Francis Tuttle, and so we have a Herman Meinders.
We have that connection. Yes, Herman
too.
Meinders is our benefactor there. He's one of the benefactors here in this amazing space, and the same thing. Traditionally, you might say that high school or VOTech or the vocational system is traditional. People maybe think about the auto mechanics or welding or things like that a center like this has done traditionally. But the entrepreneurism program and the digital focus, their own podcast studio that they have in the building here, the technology that's built in this building, it's all amazing, and it's forward thinking and preparing our workforce that, in this case, high school, who will eventually go to college, and when they're with us in college, and then when they get out in the world, to be better prepared for what those jobs are in that 26, 27, 28, 2030 range.
Absolutely. Well, that's the thing about my office being here. I've learned so much more about the career tech system than I ever thought, and really how it does go from here directly to you. So our other connection is the person who's editing this video and helping me do all of the things. His name is Garrett. He was a Francis Tuttle student, and he started working for me as a student. He's now a student at OCU. And so it just shows that very awesome path that we're preparing, students and kids for the future.
My last guest interview for the Golden Group Strategic Growth Podcast, episode 199, was Kara Evans, who is the director of Access. And same thing, I thought I knew a lot about what Career Tech was doing until someone who is 100% invested in it, I came on the podcast and completely, opened my ideas to the expansion that's happened, the forward thinkingness, the progression, and not just here in Edmond or Oklahoma City, the metro area, but all out across the whole state and rural areas as well. Actually, some of the rural areas, because they're catching up in certain ways, they're really being more progressive sometimes than the metro areas are. Mm-hmm. And career tech is absolutely an aspect of that.
Absolutely. And even from it's also great for the students, but for my business, I've talked about this so much, it really was transformative for me personally, professionally, and then the business because of everything that they're doing here right. to propel everyone forward, not just the students. But anyway, okay, you're talking about podcast guests. So I want to talk about the OVF podcast since 2018.
Right.
I want to hear some funny stories, some memorable moments, and just some things that stick out for you now looking back.
Some of the funny stories I'll tell you, I won't mention any names to make anyone feel bad about their time on the podcast, but I definitely had a few guests. Entrepreneurs are all kinds of types. So some of them are very extroverted, like us. Some of them are very introverted, the exact opposite. And they were very interested in maybe pitching or being a speaker at OVF. And then when it came time to be on the podcast, maybe got in their own head a little bit. There was a few nervous Nellies that we've had on the show that I had to talk through, how to relax and how to have a good conversation. A couple of them I had to edit pretty heavily. I had one guest that was a group of people who every time they would answer a question, they'd go, "Was that good? Was that okay?" And it was you don't have to ask every time, it's fine, and we can edit. And actually had one guest on the podcast that before they were a pitch presenter, that in the conversation on the podcast literally looked at me and said, I don't think maybe OVF is the right place for me to pitch.
Oh, no.
And sort of decided on the fly from our conversation, the questions I was asking, our standard questions for the podcast about what are you pitching about, realized he probably shouldn't be pitching to OVF. It wasn't the right audience. And we sort of ended the podcast, and I immediately called Shay, the executive director, and said, "Hey, I think you're going to have to find a new pitch presenter." And she's literally he's calling me now. And so that person ended up not even pitching because they realized through the conversation that it wasn't the right audience.
Well, what great interview skills that you have
Who knew?
To be able to help someone come to that conclusion and save them probably some heartache of getting in front of a group and pitching.
I definitely think if he had pitched the way he was talking on the podcast, I don't think it would have been received well.
Yeah.
It was actually kind of a little bit anti-capitalist, and Venture Forum is definitely a capitalist format, and I think it could have come off awkwardly, for sure, in person.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you guys did that conversation ahead of time. So I can imagine that you're learning so much about businesses and different ways of thinking, and what are those? What are some where you left a conversation or a podcast interview and you thought, okay, that was really neat, I've changed my mind about something?
One of the podcasts that really surprised me, so actually several, but anything that has to do with an entrepreneur who has developed something scientific, not necessarily a science fellow, right? I'm a business and entertainment guy, really, and marketing person. So the last episode of the podcast that I was the host of was all about natural gas conversion to propane as a fuel source for nitrogen I even said it wrong because it's so over my head. So having a scientist, an actual rocket scientist on the podcast discussing chemical conversion for hydrogen fuel. The whole time I was thinking I hope I ask good questions because the science of this really went over my head. It was very impressive. It ended up being actually simpler than I expected, and that was happening right here in Oklahoma, something that was very advanced that I would have not ever known about because those aren't areas I venture off into. And I had another episode that was on natural gas storage that then after that podcast we got to talking about the fact that Bitcoin miners are buying natural gas leases, old natural gas leases, and using the natural gas that typically is flamed off. You see a well that just has a flame on the side of the road. They're capping that and converting that into energy to run their Bitcoin mining operations. it's a whole subcategory I knew nothing about. I'm not a Bitcoin guy, but that was really interesting in the fact that Oklahoma has so much abundant natural gas and so many wells that probably were being underutilized or unutilized. Was interesting thing that I learned I would have no idea if I had not had a conversation with that individual. So yeah, there have been a few things. I think some of the scientific applications like the Paranano wound product.
Huge fan.
Right? So having scientists and people like that who are starting businesses that are over my head sometimes. Dr. Shimashaki with Moleculara, like some of those conversations really got me thinking, like, I thought I knew what I was talking about, and in this case I really don't. So it was quite interesting to hear things that I would have no opportunity to probably have that kind of conversation, and with people who are experts in their field, not people who are like just had an idea, but were really advancing the curve on those things.
Absolutely. And I also think that that's a good dynamic of being able to talk to someone, and why so many people listen to podcasts, because it is like a top 5 Oklahoma podcast, and that's probably why, is because, I mean, sure, I can be like, oh, that's great, listening about your molecular something. I do social media, right? Tell me more about that, kind of thing. But it makes it more approachable for someone who's listening who also doesn't know anything about hydrogen gas and capping thing.
I'm sure too, hydrogen scientists would speak differently to each other than one scientist and one marketing guy. Because I was asking questions literally I did not know. I was like, I don't know what this is, please. And I'm hoping that everyone listening to the podcast were saying thank you, because I have that same question, because most of us aren't that scientist.
Right. No, most of us aren't like that smart
right.
in a subject.
In that specific way.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things we use all the time is like the average reading level in the United States. Do you know what it is?
It's still around 6th grade.
Yeah, like 5th grade.
Right.
Yeah. And so we have like several clients that we write at a 3rd grade level.
Yeah.
And we always say like, people push back all the time, because they're like, no, we have to use these words. I'm like, but people don't understand those words.
Right.
And if they're reading something that they don't understand or listening to something they don't understand, they're not going to continue. So like the best way of showing your expertise is being able to explain it in the simplest terms. Right. And so I love that you're helping people translate that, because I do the same thing. Like, I want people to think I'm intelligent.
Sure.
I want to put
we all do.
I want to put the biggest words I know on that blog post or in that ebook or whatever, but that doesn't make sense to do because no one understands it. And so, yeah, translating that for people is really important, and helping everyone understand we're doing really cool things in the state of Oklahoma.
Yeah. Even
if we don't always get it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I would look at my other things. So you've been doing this since 2018. So like, how did this OVF podcast even get started? Like, what are those early days like?
Mostly because I was already doing 2 podcasts on my own. I just kind of pitched it to Shane, like, why don't we have a podcast? The whole point and value of OVF membership, right, is to hear the pitch presentation and hear the speaker that comes in every month. And those speakers talk on a variety of subjects, typically business related, but I was sitting in the audience going, man, I'm hearing a great presentation from someone that I wish the whole world could hear. And for me, in my brain, went straight to, well, of course, that should be a podcast. Along the years, we've kind of changed the pitch format too. It's become a little bit shorter, a little bit more tighter of a pitch. Now it's a 5-minute pitch. So when someone has 5 minutes to pitch, you've probably been in pitches, right, where you're like, 5 minutes means just the basics. You got to get in, get some numbers, and get out. So 20, 30 minutes on a podcast allows us to go so much deeper into how did this all start, what's your motivation, who's on your team, all of the things you just can't put in a 5-minute pitch. So trying to capture those great speakers and the great topics that the world would think, oh, well, they're speaking at OVF, maybe I should be attending OVF meetings and I could learn something from what they're doing, and maximizing the time, because every speaker at OVF is a pro bono. They're not getting paid to be our speakers. So we should maximize the time we have with them and promote them and all the things that they're doing as well as an organization, because they're giving us their time and expertise. And the same thing with pitch presenters, we need them to be successful. We need startups to be successful. We need them to be funded and to find the right partners and all those things, because we need new business to continue to develop the ecosystem. And so creating an additional opportunity for pitch presenters and rewarding our main presenters was sort of in the back of my head about like we should be doing this. And I already had the equipment and I knew how to do it, and I thought, oh, this will be easy. Of course, it's never quite as easy as you think, even when you know how to do it. So I just kind of leaned into it and kind of worked it out on the fly.
I love that. And now like the board and everyone is supporting for it to continue because it has such a strong foundation. And you get to still serve on the board and be like, yeah, keep doing this.
Yeah, keep doing that.
Keep
for sure.
promoting people.
Yeah.
Because I do think that's one of the benefits of OVF membership is this opportunity to come in and pitch and like get feedback from everyone, and then this extra promotion, because what startup doesn't want extra promotion?
Right. You know, the podcast live forever. Every podcast that we recorded, both the audio version and video version, videos on YouTube, the audio versions are on, you know, all your favorite platforms, Spotify and Apple and iHeartRadio, etc. And they're always there. They'll be there forever. You know, now if you pitched 6 years ago, you probably are in a different place in the world. But if you pitched this last year or 2 years ago, and maybe you're still in the startup process, you can use that podcast for promoting yourself, promoting your business, telling potential investors, like, here's the whole story. You know, like I pitched to OVF, and that's a mark of approval to begin with. And then now here's some more information. You can go listen to this podcast and learn more about the founder or the business itself.
Right. And so from an OVF board member perspective, so out of the host seat and back into this like overarching strategy thing, one of the things we've done last week and then this week for OVF is do this like member, well, it's not really
a kickoff.
Yeah, a little kickoff, kickoff event.
Member recruiting / season kickoff.
I was going to say recruitment. I was like, is it recruitment?
Yeah.
And so I kind of like stopped myself a moment, but thank you. And so like now that you're not doing the podcast, like where's your creative energy going to go next for OVF and all the different members that are coming on board?
So I'm still, you know, I'm a Twitter fiend. Like I'm on Twitter all day long for my job and for my side hustles and for myself. And so I'm always trying to share as much of the postings from OVF and our local businesses and the startups we're involved with and things like Access and everyone else. I try to share as much on my social media channels, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, you know, just attending events and being a good member, networking, meeting people, trying to be a good ambassador for the organization, talking to my boss at OCU about, you know, sponsoring some things. So just continuing to connect and give back and build the ecosystem. You know, it's the rising tide that lifts all of our boats. So I'm trying to play my roles just in different ways.
Yeah, I love that. Well, okay, so I have two final questions for you.
Okay.
I'm adding another one in here. So the first is like handing off this hosting over to me, and thank you so much. It's sort of like, what's your big advice for me on like to take this torch and keep it going?
You know, you have the benefit of, like I said earlier, of having great pitch presenters and great speakers that you get to interview. So more than anything else, now the pitch presenters often sometimes can be a little uptight, a little awkward. Maybe public speaking isn't their thing. So, you know, making them comfortable, making them feel like it's a conversation. You know, we know each other, and obviously I'm comfortable with all of this, so
right.
We can have a great
That
conversation.
really helps.
But the more comfortable of a conversation you have in the room, the better it ends up sounding when someone's listening back in their headphones or watching on a YouTube video. It becomes a better product when you can allow them to not think about all of this and just talk to you.
Yeah.
So, you know, just asking good questions, being attentive, being prepared, I think is really huge. I've been a guest on some podcasts that 2 minutes in, you realize that the host wasn't prepared for you, and it can be a real bummer. It can kind of pull the energy out. But if you feel like the host is prepared, I think when your main speakers, and they're public speakers, they're a lot more comfortable having the conversations, and they're prepared their presentation for OVF, so they know what they're going to talk about. They know how to. So that more is about, you know, again, rewarding them for participating, but showing them you're prepared, showing them you're interested, showing them that OVF as an organization values everything they bring to the table. I think lets them walk away from the experience having an even better idea of what OVF is, and maybe they'll become a member, maybe they'll sponsor, maybe they'll tell everyone at where they work and who they work with that OVF is a valuable organization, and that's how we keep that growing as well.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you very much. And I think it's goes without saying as just like a huge thank you for starting this podcast and pouring so much of your time and talent into it, not just to better OVF, but the community and all of the people that you've talked to. And like, it's a really big deal. And thank you so much.
The podcast for me was a little bit of a continuation of when I was the chairman in 2019, 2020. 2020 got a little awkward with things that happened in the world in 2020. But my theme was, you can do that in Oklahoma. My whole career I've been told, if you want to be in the music industry, if you want to be in marketing, if you want to be in creative services, you have to leave Oklahoma. And I've always pushed back on that. I've always refused to believe that, and I never have left. And now, it's very easy for the world to see what's happening here in Oklahoma. But this podcast, doing this for OVF, being involved with OVF, is a continuation of dispelling those myths that you can't do that in Oklahoma. And now I think everyone would agree in 2024, you can do absolutely anything you want to do here in Oklahoma and compete globally and be successful and have just as much an opportunity to build for yourself and for your family and for your employees as anywhere else on the planet.
Well said. You can do that here. I like that. New state motto.
I like it.
I do too. Okay, and then the real final question. So what is the advice that you would give to Oklahoma entrepreneurs and business owners?
Lean into the strengths of Oklahoma, the things that do set us apart and make us unique and distinct. And it's the things that people outside of Oklahoma think are our weaknesses. So yes, it's a smaller business community. That's awesome. We get to know each other. We work together. We're collaborative. You'll hear people all the time say the greatest thing about Oklahoma is the people. That's 100% true. And that still applies to business people. The people in business, we treat each other like neighbors, and we're collaborative. We're in this boat together that the tide is lifting. It's much less of a competitive, cutthroat type thing that are in certain areas around the country and around the world where people will crawl over you to be successful. Those things happen in other places. It happens here, but it's very rare. It's Oklahoma is Oklahoma City is that biggest small town, kind of thing. And so absolutely lean into the idea that you can put yourself out there, that you can come to OVF and maybe you're a startup founder, or maybe you're 2 years out of college or 10 years into your career, and you can walk right in and talk to a CEO of a Fortune 50 company. Or you could talk to a founder that is 10 years in and you could emulate what they've been doing. You can meet someone like Mike Beckham from Simple Modern and learn that when I interviewed him in 2 years ago, they were going to do $190 million in sales. Now they're well over 250, looking at $300 million in sales from Moore, Oklahoma. There's all of the venture capital that's there, all the service providers, all the other entrepreneurs, everyone who's in this ecosystem, education, everyone wants to see everyone succeed. We don't need to kill each other to get ahead. If we absolutely create, I've said this 3 or 4 times, but it's real, the rising tide, we can create all that together, and Oklahomans prefer to do that. We're very entrepreneurial by nature. We're very giving by nature. We're very open-minded, and we're very good about seeing each other as benefits, even if we're what you call competitors. You're right? Because we're in the same boat together. So lean into that. Take advantage of that. Ask people for conversations. Talk to people. Attend events. Network. Show up. Be present. Go right on up to someone. And even though you might think, I've only done this in life and they've done these great things, walk up there and say hello. I guarantee you they'll be happy to say hello to you and have a conversation with you. And if it's someone that you emulate in the world, tell them. And they'll be happy to tell you how they did it, and they'll share with you. And who knows, maybe you end up working together. So my advice for Oklahoma entrepreneurs is take full advantage of that. We might take it for granted, but that doesn't happen all over the country. And that's our strength, and that's the thing that you can build off of. And then when you have that support, when you get your business where it needs to be, when you get your career where you need to be, you can then say, but I can do that in Oklahoma. And you can compete globally, but take that opportunity early to just lean into the people, ask questions, listen to them, look for their examples, ask for help. You know, the hardest thing in the world for an entrepreneur is to ask for help anywhere in the world. It's easier to get that help in Oklahoma.
Oh, so well said. All of that, and it's true. I mean, I live and breathe it all the time. I probably, we have clients that'll come to us, or potential clients. I'm like, well, who else are you talking to? And I love when they say, I'm like, oh, they do great work. Oh, they do. And I'm like, okay, that might feel odd to them, but I'm like talking up the other people that they're getting proposals from, because there are like a lot of great people doing amazing work here. But I think you're right. I don't know that everybody does that.
No, and like I said, the Golden Group has clients in 10 different states, and we had an office in Philadelphia for quite a while, and the scene in Philadelphia was different, and the scene we participated in Boston and New York, and it was different, very different. You know, we did some business in Dallas that felt kind of Oklahoma-like. Kansas City kind of felt Oklahoma-like. Cleveland, Ohio felt a little Oklahoma-like. But you know, then you go to California, and it's a whole different animal altogether. So, you know, find that spot that makes sense to you. I think we're attracting people from those coasts because of that. So we have to keep doing it, and it takes us talking about it and, you know, kind of proving out the model.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being my very first guest. Handing this over, like, you're just amazing. You're one of the people who I emulate and try to like watch what you're doing and stay on top of the curve. And so it's an honor to have this handed off.
I'm happy to be handing this off. I've done it for a while. I've appreciated everything about it, but I'm happy someone else is doing it. I'm happy you're the person doing it. I'm very happy to be on with you today and make this transition happen. So now all of you can know, like, the 2024, 2025 session, all the interviews are going to be Lindsey, and she's going to be talking to people and doing great things as the OVF podcast and OVF and all of this move forward together.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And so for anyone who's watching or listening, you can go to ovf.org, learn more about the Oklahoma Venture Forum. You can listen to this podcast on all of your favorite platforms. You can watch the video on YouTube, and I hope you join us for one of our monthly luncheons.